F-Zero was one of the two launching titles of the SNES besides Super Mario World, and responsible for selling the console by sheer awesomeness in the stores. Mostly by showcasing the Mode 7 graphics, but also with a sound that could be heard by people standing far away in the store. Super Mario was a familiar face at the time, with well-established melodies and gameplay, while F-Zero was futuristic, edgy and new. But how new and modern was the F-Zero soundtrack? For those of you who haven't played the game, it's about bounty hunters. But they don't hunt any bounties and instead drive car races. Except that it isn't cars, because they are lacking wheels due to memory limitations. Now to the music. The original unmodified NES could only use 5 sound channels. 3 handling tones, the noise channel for drums and sound effects, and the sample channel that frankly wasn't used that much. This left the music to be composed as maximum 3 parts and percussion. The SNES, on the other hand, had a capacity of 8 sample channels in stereo. 8 channels that all could do anything. It is easy to assume that we would now get 8-part music, but Yumiko Kanki and Naoto Ishida never went over 5 parts and percussion, and the only piece with that many parts was the ending theme. If I may harass you with some statistics of the whole soundtrack. Strictly composition-wise, almost 2/3 of the soundtrack could be made on a NES without losing any part. It would sound different, but all tones would be there. So, the reason for the few parts. First, to be fair, 8-part music isn't that great. Even a lot of symphonic music keeps to 3 to 5 parts, and the rest is just doubles and octaves of that. Second, most of the tracks didn't access all 8 channels. Rather, all gameplay music was written in 5 channels, leaving channels 6 to 8 for sound effects. During the NES era, this was usually made by voice stealing instead, meaning every time a sound effect sounded, one part of the music would also stop playing. In the 90s, the SNES audio teams would still rely on voice stealing, but to a much lesser degree, while the sound effects took a much greater part in the sound landscape. In F-Zero's case, the sound effects weren't any one-off beeps, but continuous motors, a type of sound effect that would have given serious ear fatigue by an 80s noise channel. Lastly, they continued the tradition of combining 2 channels into one part for effects, above-mentioned octave doubles, or simply multiple instruments. Sometimes the drums would also occupy multiple channels for radical stuff such as playing the kick and the hi-hat at the same time. Let's have a look at some 3-part writing in Red Canyon. In this case, channels 1 and 2 handles the drums. And channel 3 gets the bass ostinato. Channels 4 and 5 gets melodies that shifts between 4 different samples, and it is here that all of the variation of the otherwise rather loopy piece is heard. And yeah, the 4ths are strong with those 2. Lastly, channel 6 to 8 is reserved for sound effects. The big musical difference from the NES then wasn't in the notes and part writing, but rather in the timbre work, where the SNES excelled. It was sample-based, so any sound you could record with little enough memory, you could use. The music of F-Zero in total uses 23 different samples. This is not a humongous number, and quite comparable to Super Mario World. It is a noticeable number for a soundtrack with only 13 songs and 3 stingers, but what was remarkable was the number of similar samples. Let's take the electric bass as an example. We have the regular bass sample. We have the harpsichord woken up on the wrong side bass for rockier moments. Then there are the funkier bass sound. Unfortunately, none of these were really good for long notes, so in Mute City, the hardcore harpsichord sample was combined with a low fluty brass sample for a fourth bass sound with a richer tone. It should also be mentioned by this time that while some of these samples are used a lot, others are unique for only one song and then never used again. This way there are 6 different percussion-related samples, and Miss Kanky still never used any single cymbals. There are also 4 different horns-related samples, and if we continue from Mute City, the track could have been done with just a single wind sample, but not with the same clarity in the dialogue between the 2 lines. At the end, the brass is joined with a sinus-based sample, here poetically named Sample Number 6, for a as subtle as great variation of timbre. Just as well, a lot of work has gone into making those samples sound good. Let's have a look at the solo in Big Blue. It's probably discussable what instrument is intended here, but the sample used has formerly been used in a saxophone manner, so for simplicity's sake, let's call it a sax solo. There's a lot of feel here, partly because it's a well-built solo in a high-octane tempo, but also thanks to all the small bends and glissandos and selectively used vibratos that makes the SNES sound human. We start in half tempo to hear all the details, and kill all sense of speed. And now in full speed and ensemble. At last, there are the stereo. The stereo channels were so new and cool that the manual pushed for the player to connect the sound to the TV speaker to appreciate them. Of course, there are the traditional panning in the mix and some playing around with it. But at a few places there are some rather special stereo work. Deathwind is written in only 3 channels, reserving 2 of the ordinary music channels to the aforementioned Deathwind. Of those 3 channels, 2 goes to the percussion, and that's where the magic is happening. First, the snare samples are transposed around, just like any of the pitched instruments. Because the snare doesn't have much of a tone, the pitch never gets that specific. It just becomes brighter and darker snares. No melodies. When the percussion begins, the logic seems to be high pitch equals panning to the right, low pitch pans to the left. A few exceptions are made, where there are additional pan movement, seemingly to enhance the feeling of accented and unaccented beats. And from now on, we take all the examples in half tempo. The second snare doubles a second lower, meaning a couple of degrees to the left. This muddles the exact panning and just leaves a sense of the movement. When the 2 snare rhythms are separated, the second channel are moved a far step to the left to also separate them in the mix, which is an absolutely traditional move. But the pitch-related movement remains. The toms, of course, are moving from right to left and then back when fills are made. The kick drum is never transposed in any way, but do still have some rather rhythmic movement between right and center. Listening to this in full tempo takes away most of these details, especially when the Deathwind is on, and what is left is to me a sense of movement and wonderful chaos. To conclude, the music of F-Zero wasn't very revolutionary in the part of the composition that you could read in the sheet music, but took a number of steps to take full advance of the new console when it came to all the parts that can only be heard. Thank you for listening, and have a nice day.